Hey, what's going on, everyone? Hope you're all doing good. Today, we've got a brand new update for Megabonk to talk about, update 1.0.12. And honestly, it's one of those patches that might not look massive on the surface, but once you actually get into it and start playing, you can feel how much it changes the overall rhythm of the game. This one touches a bunch of different areas, some buffs, a few nerfs, quality of life stuff, and even some tweaks that completely shift how certain builds feel. So let's talk through it. Like we're just chatting after a few runs, because there's a lot that's changed, cool little details hidden in there that make the game feel fresh again. So right off the bat, the thing that stood out to me the most is the Chaos Tome buff. And man, if you've been sleeping on tomes before, now's the time to start paying attention to them. Tomes were always one of those items that could swing your run if you got lucky, but now with the buff giving around 50% better rewards, it completely changes how you approach early game strategy. Before, it was kind of a gamble, like, do you really want to burn a slot hoping for something decent? But now it feels worth it. That risk-reward balance tilts more in your favor, and if you're building around resource multipliers or refresh mechanics, it's a big deal. Suddenly, things like stacking XP boosters or using refresh-heavy perks actually feel more valuable because you're maximizing what tomes can do for you. It's one of those changes that sneaks up on you. You might not notice it right away, but a few runs later, you realize you're leveling faster and earning more from the same effort. Then there's the black hole change. And yeah, this one's a bit more controversial. They increase the default size, which is great. It looks and feels cooler, the visual impact is definitely there, and it makes it easier to hit more enemies in bigger groups. But the trade-off is that they reduced the proc coefficient, meaning it doesn't trigger on-hit effects as often. So if you were running one of those wild proc stacking builds, like the classic moldy cheese and spicy meatball combo, this update kind of slows that down. You can't rely on the black hole to chain as many reactions anymore, so those chaos-heavy builds that used to melt everything with proc spam don't feel quite the same. Instead, the game's sort of pushing you toward builds that emphasize area damage or duration. In other words, the raw impact of the black hole itself, not what it can trigger. Honestly, I don't hate it. It's a balanced move that tones down some of the chaos and makes it more about managing your space and timing. It's just something you have to adapt to, because old muscle memory might have you waiting for procs that aren't going to come as often anymore. And speaking of enemies, the Roly Bones speed nerf on the desert maps is such a small tweak, but it changes the whole feel of that biome. They slowed them down a bit, and suddenly the desert feels less chaotic and more tactical. Before, Roly Bones were just flying at you nonstop, and if you weren't fast or tanky enough, it could feel kind of unfair. Now, with that speed cut, you have more room to plan your movement and kite enemies, which gives builds that rely on timed procs or controlled spacing a lot more breathing room. I ran a few desert sessions after the patch, and you can really feel it. You're not just constantly dodging for your life anymore. You actually get to make choices, set up combos, and plan your next move. It's one of those quality of life disguised as balance type changes that just makes the game flow better. Another nice tweak that I think is flying under the radar right now is the bush passive on the Marksman. Before this update, it was decent but not super exciting. The cooldown was long enough that it didn't really change your rhythm much unless you went out of your way to build around it. But now they've tied the cooldown to your level scaling, starting at 5 seconds and dropping by 0.4 seconds per 10 levels until it caps at just 1 second by level 100. That's a big shift. Suddenly, late-game Marksman runs feel way smoother. It rewards you for grinding it out and scaling up properly, and it makes the bush playstyle way more engaging. It's one of those things where you can actually feel yourself getting stronger as you level up, not just in stats, but in rhythm. The gameplay loop tightens, everything feels snappier, and it keeps you more active. They also gave some attention to the final swarm challenge, which is really cool to see. That mode had some rough edges, a few bugs here and there, some balance inconsistencies, and it's been overhauled to feel more coherent. The enemy pacing is better, the rewards are more aligned with effort, and overall it feels like a proper late-game test again. It's not something you'll immediately notice if you're still progressing through earlier runs, but once you hit it, it feels a lot cleaner. Performance in general seems better too. Frame stutters and weird leaderboard sync issues seem less frequent. I didn't hit a single crash during my testing runs, which is already a good sign. What's interesting about this whole update is that even though it doesn't look like a massive overhaul, it really reshapes how the meta feels. You can see it already in the community. Tier lists are shifting, builds that used to dominate are getting rethought, and people are experimenting with new synergies again. Honestly, my favorite part of patches like this, the experimentation phase. Everyone's trying stuff, testing weird combos, and seeing what still works. So let's talk meta for a second. The big losers here are definitely the heavy proc builds. Anything that relied too much on Black Hole to trigger chain effects is weaker now. It's not dead, don't get me wrong, but you have to adjust your approach. Instead of stacking procs, you want to lean more into builds that increase flat damage or amplify the duration and area of your core attacks. For example, if you were doing those moldy cheese or spicy meatball chains, maybe pivot towards something that enhances area control instead. Think about how you can use Black Hole as crowd control while other abilities or items do the real damage work. On the flip side, tome-based builds are seeing a huge boost right now. That 50% reward bump completely changes the value of investing in tomes early. Before, it was kind of a nice to have, but now it's a genuine power spike. If you can pick one up early and pair it with multipliers that enhance your gold or XP gains, you'll snowball way faster than before. It's also a great patch for people who like reroll mechanics or refresh builds. You're getting more out of your tomes, which means every refresh decision carries more weight. It's kind of like the game's giving you more agency to plan out your growth instead of relying purely on random drops. Boss fights and single target situations also feel smoother this time around. Performance tweaks have made those moments less laggy, and it makes builds like the Dexecutioner way more fun to use. It's nice to see that those moments that used to feel clunky now play out cleanly. Even though it's not a big flashy change, the smoother frame pacing during intense fights makes the whole thing feel more polished. One other subtle change that's worth noting is how these tweaks impact pacing. With slower enemies on desert maps, more efficient tomes, and black hole procs being toned down, the game feels a little more deliberate overall. It's less about chaos and more about rhythm, positioning, timing, knowing when to push and when to fall back. That makes for a more thoughtful kind of gameplay, and I think it's going to make new strategies emerge that emphasize smart control instead of pure explosive synergy stacking. I've also seen a few players already experimenting with Marksman builds that take advantage of the new bush cooldown scaling. If you haven't tried it yet, you should. The new cooldown timing completely changes the feel of that class, especially once you get past level 50. The faster cooldown keeps you active, and by the time you're at level 100, it's almost like you've got a new rhythm entirely. I ran a test build that focused purely on that scaling, and it feels incredible. You're weaving attacks together with such a smooth cadence that you almost forget what it was like before. It's the kind of change that doesn't buff the numbers, it changes the personality of the class. Now, for anyone who's competitive or into the leaderboard grind, it's worth mentioning that there were some leaderboard and performance fixes as well. Things seem more stable now, and if you were getting weird inconsistencies with scores or progress tracking, those should be a lot better. No official leaderboard reset, but definitely a cleanup behind the scenes that helps level the playing field a bit. So what should you actually do if you're jumping back in after this patch? My advice is pretty simple. Experiment. Take your old builds, tweak them, and pay attention to how they feel now. If you were running black hole heavy setups, try replacing some of those proc items with raw damage or area boosters. If you were sleeping on tomes, give them a real chance now and see how far that reward buff can push your run. And if you love Marksman, focus on leveling. That scaling cooldown will make your runs feel progressively better the longer you go.